Even though it might not have been so good overall, 2020 was a great year for the video game industry. Several titles that have been anticipated for years were finally released, including The Last of Us Part 2 and, of course, Cyberpunk 2077. After a long wait, virtual reality finally got its killer app in the form of Half-Life Alyx, and new surprises have risen to massive popularity like Fall Guys and Among Us. As 2020 winds down and we look ahead to next year, I would like to take a moment to talk about what I think could be in store for the future. As a result, here are my predictions for the gaming industry in 2021. After releasing in the mid-2010s, modern virtual reality technology has largely failed to catch on with a mainstream audience, or even outside of a few dedicated hobbyists. Only a few games, like the rhythm game Beat Saber, as well as an excellent iteration of Superhot, has gained widespread popularity on the platform. This was the current picture of virtual reality gaming until the release of Half-Life Alyx. The popularity of the Half-Life series, as well as the quality of the final product, led many to buy a VR system for the first time. In 2021, I suspect that there will be an even higher rate of adoption for virtual reality than there was in 2020. This will be due to two factors: lowering the barrier of entry and an increase in developer interest. With the release of the new Oculus Quest 2 at $300, virtual reality has become cheaper than at any point in the past decade. And even though it is cheap, the fact that it was released alongside the new generation of consoles means that its sales were likely not as high as they could have been. When their wallets recover from the Xbox Series X and the PS5, more people will be willing to look into purchasing a VR system in 2021 than they were in 2020. They will also be motivated by the increase in virtual reality game reveals and releases that are sure to be following in the wake of Valve's success with Half-Life Alyx. The fact that the market has been proven to be viable by a big company with a large release will stem more and more developers' interest in making games primarily in, or at least that support, virtual reality functionality. I predict that these factors will lead to a bigger increase in the user base of VR systems than we have seen in the past, but it will still not be enough to get headsets into the hands of mainstream adopters. Whether virtual reality gaming will ever truly go mainstream will be decided in the near future, but it will not be in 2021. Ever since the Battlefront 2 fiasco in 2017, which brought industry greed to the attention of national governments, there has been an incentive by developers to roll back the implementation of loot boxes in their games. This specific type of microtransaction is different than others because it does not guarantee what purchasers receive. Instead, it utilizes a gambling mechanism to randomize the rewards gained from a purchase. Understandably, games ratings boards like the ESRB were worried about government intervention in the industry, and now require specific labels on games which feature, in their words, in-game purchases that include random items. Given the pushback, we have already seen major series like Call of Duty back away from the concept, yet there are still a few prominent companies which include loot boxes in their games. Because of the gaming industry's well-documented ability to adapt, especially in the arena of corporate greed, I suspect that business people at larger developers will shy away from putting loot boxes in their games in 2021. Don't get too excited yet, though. It only makes financial sense that by taking out loot boxes, the old forms of classic mobile game microtransactions will become more prevalent. The most important thing is to make sure that these microtransactions, especially in multiplayer games, stick to cosmetic additions that are non-randomized. This is because it was not only that loot boxes in Battlefront 2 embraced a gambling mentality, but that they also improved weapons and abilities that were otherwise unavailable to new players. These pay-to-win elements are what generated the massive amount of backlash against the game's microtransactions and brought loot boxes to the attention of national governing bodies. In order to keep governments away from cracking down on the industry as they have in the past, I predict that there will be few, if any, major releases that choose to include loot boxes as a microtransaction in 2021. For a while now, especially over the last console generation, Sony's strategy of securing exclusivity deals with many top-tier development studios has put them ahead of their competition. In their respective generations, the variants of the PlayStation have outsold not only every Xbox console, but also every Nintendo console except for the Wii. Sony's dominance in the field of exclusive games looks to continue into at least the near future. The lack of a significant launch title for the Xbox Series X was largely due to the delay of Halo Infinite, still to be released on an unannounced date in 2021. Halo's delay gave the PlayStation a head start in terms of released console selling exclusives, as we enter the second year of the generation. 4 big PlayStation exclusives have the potential to release next year, with one, Deathloop, already set to be released in May. The other 3 include new entries in the God of War and Horizon series, as well as Ghostwire Tokyo, a new property from the developers of the Evil Within series. This combination of new and old properties from acclaimed studios practically ensures the continued superiority of PlayStation's exclusives over the Xbox. With PlayStation games dominating Game of the Year discussions over the past few years, I don't think 2021 will be any different. I predict that at least 3 of the 4 exclusives I have listed will release this year to critical and commercial success, and that they will also garner a significant amount of praise during end-of-year discussions from award shows and media outlets. It's not all doom and gloom for Microsoft and the Xbox, though. The recent acquisition of Bethesda and its sub-studios has given rise to the thought that all of their new releases could become exclusive to Xbox, besides those that have been announced for PlayStation already. In my opinion, the bigger news is that these games are going to come to Xbox's subscription service, Game Pass, at launch. During 2020, Xbox Game Pass has expanded to become the most must-have subscription service for games, featuring hundreds of games at the relatively cheap price of $10 a month. The success of Game Pass in bringing in new subscribers has led me to believe that the games as a subscription format will be the primary focus of the Xbox team during the current console generation. Seeing as they have had lackluster results in attempting to keep up with PlayStation in both game hardware and software sales, Xbox will look to circumvent the traditional purchasing models of the industry and try to get as many players on Game Pass as possible. This will serve 2 purposes. First, a constant flow of income from Game Pass subscribers will allow Xbox to support their many newly acquired studios with a consistently larger budget for developing their exclusive games than they would have had otherwise. This will contribute to better games releasing on the service at launch, which will lead to more interest in subscribers, and could prove to be a more efficient method for making good games and lots of money than has ever been seen in the industry before. Additionally, depending on how successful the service is in the long term, Game Pass has the potential to transcend console generations completely and be a major reason for gamers to buy an Xbox like traditional exclusives have been for the PlayStation brand. It would be an ingenious move by Xbox, as it would take the games as a service trend that has been applied to individual games in recent years and apply it to a fully fledged subscription service with thousands of hours of content. Because of the high ceiling on its potential, I predict that Game Pass will feature nearly double the number of games it currently does by the end of 2021. With 2 new IPs set to release over the next 12 months, and being recently purchased by Microsoft, 2021 is looking to be an interesting year for Bethesda Game Studios. The new games are 2 that I previously mentioned as PlayStation exclusives, Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo. As I said before, I suspect that these games will be well received in terms of reviews and sales numbers due to the prominence of the studios developing them. In combination with the success of Doom Eternal in 2020, I believe that these fresh properties will serve to help turn around the negative public image that has plagued Bethesda over the past few years regarding its treatment of the Fallout series. Granted, these games are being primarily developed by sub-studios and only published by Bethesda, so it will likely take a new game developed by Bethesda's development studio to recover their goodwill entirely. With this being said, I think Deathloop will stick to its release date in the spring, with Ghostwire Tokyo releasing in the summer or early fall. As a result, the pre-Christmas release season will be left without the new release of a Bethesda-published game for the 3rd year in a row. I don't believe that they will let this happen. I predict that next year, Bethesda Game Studios will release its long-awaited new science fiction property, Starfield. Studio director Todd Howard stated in an interview in 2016 that Bethesda was working on 2 large projects that would likely be released before The Elder Scrolls 6. The first of these projects, Fallout 76, was released in 2018. The second was revealed at E3 in 2018 to be Starfield, the company's first original property in 25 years. Given that since Fallout 3, Bethesda Game Studios has released a large RPG every 3 to 4 years, a 2021 release for Starfield would fall right in line with their schedule. I suspect that they have not released much information about the game yet because they will reveal it at a few months before the release like they did with Fallout 4, in order to drum up hype for the new property. Releasing Starfield in 2021 would also set up the next game in the Elder Scrolls series to be released in 3 to 4 years during the current console generation. Similar to how Fallout 3 and Skyrim, then Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 were released on subsequent generations. Due to how all of these timelines stack up, I predict that Bethesda will publish 2 successful games next year in Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, as well as finally release their next major RPG game in the form of Starfield. While the gaming industry becomes bigger, with more moving parts every year, it becomes more difficult to make predictions that will actually come true. As it stands, I feel pretty confident in my predictions for 2021. However, it'll probably end up that some of my predictions are proven false, because making them is tough. In the interview with Bethesda director Todd Howard that I referenced earlier, he mentioned, "We're not a developer that's going to rush something like this out. Any of our games." 2 years later, Bethesda Game Studios released Fallout 76. So it's true that no one really knows what's in store for the future of gaming.